Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, working their way through spring practice. And I'm sure many Oregon fans who are tuning in today probably feel the same way that I do. It's been pretty guarded. It's been pretty close to the vest for Dan Lanning and this Oregon program. That being said, you are seeing some maybe not massive storylines, but some really intriguing storylines start to emerge coming from this Oregon team throughout spring practice. My general take on Oregon going into 2025, this is something we talked about heading into spring practice. This is something you've heard Dan Lanning say. This is something you've heard some other position coaches say. This is something you've heard from some of the players who've done press conferences during spring practice. Don't confuse returning production with talent. Yes, this Oregon team loses a lot of production from the 2024 year. A lot of their best players in the 2024 year are off to the NFL draft. So on paper, you look at this roster and, to the casual college football fan, some members of the national media, I don't know many of these names. Haven't seen a ton from these names over the last couple of years, but to an Oregon fan who follows this program pretty damn closely, this is a team, and Dan Lanning, and you've heard some position coaches say this is a team that is more physically gifted. It's a more talented football team than what we saw in 2024. Now, you got to see that talent come together in the 2025 year, but from a raw talent standpoint, this team is really, really good. And the ceiling for this Oregon team is really, really high. Want to get into a few storylines that have emerged that have kind of caught my attention as we work our way through spring practice. Before we get into it, as always, the Oregon fans, appreciate you guys. It hasn't been an all that busy last couple of weeks because there's not a ton coming from this program during spring practice, but the amount of support the Oregon fans continue to show to the boys during the offseason on the recruiting trail. Can't thank you guys enough. Appreciate it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start with something that has been circulating on Twitter. We've been chopping it up with a bunch of Oregon fans on Twitter about this positionless secondary. Those are the words from Chris Hampton. What he means by that is that you have so much talent in this secondary heading into 2025. There's not a ton of guys who are, locks to be starters in 2025, but there's a ton of really good football players competing to get onto the football field. What Chris Hampton means by positionless secondary is, look, we want to get our best five on the football field. I got a lot of questions on Twitter the last couple of weeks about having Naheem Offord slotted in as a nickelback going into the 2025 year. This is, I guess, kind of what I was trying to get at here is Naheem Offord might be a top 5 defensive back on this football team, but he might not be better than a guy like Ifeoma Daegu, and he might not be a better guy than Jaleel Florence. Well, he might be your third best cornerback, and if you want to get your third best cornerback on the football field, the only place you can play him is at nickel. And so you've seen Chris Hampton say, hey, we got a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things. We're going to try to get our best five on the football field. And if that means cross-training some guys, if that means taking Naheem off and say, hey, we're going to teach you how to play boundary cornerback because you're going to be a third boundary cornerback. But if that also means getting you on the football field more as a freshman, we're going to teach you how to play nickel as well. You see that top to bottom within this Oregon secondary. It's a fascinating position group because you look at it and say, as we sit right now, I think the only lock is Dylan Tiemann. Dylan Tiemann's going to start at safety. There's no doubt about that. Everywhere else, you kind of like, hey, we'll see how it shakes out. If you told me Brandon Finney, true freshman, gets on the football field, I wouldn't be surprised. If you told me Dakota Fields emerges as a starter, probably wouldn't be surprised either. The one guy that you're hearing all the right things about, this is from the coaches, this is from other players, is Ifeoma Daegu. It was my favorite Oregon commit in the 2024 cycle, a kid that is, if you were to build a boundary cornerback in the laboratory, it'd probably spit something out like Ifeoma Daegu, who was really polished coming from St. Francis Academy too. He's a guy that hasn't played a ton of football yet. If you told me he was a first-team All-Big Ten guy in 2025, I wouldn't be stunned. And I don't think a lot of Oregon fans would be all that stunned as well. Ifeoma Daegu seems like he's emerging, and I think he can be an absolute dude for Oregon in 2025. The other thing that he noted, two other things, Chris Hampton in his press conference, that I thought were kind of exciting. One, he recognized that this secondary looks different. Last year was a really good secondary. And Chris Hampton was very vocal saying, hey, we really liked our guys like Jabbar Muhammad, Kobe Savage back there last year. This secondary looks different from a height, weight, speed metric. You got a lot of guys that go 6'1 plus. You got a lot of really big athletes in this room, and you got a lot of fast athletes in this room as well. I mean, you look at guys like Naheem Offord or Trey McNutt, Brandon Finney coming in. These are all 6'2 plus guys that are coming in with 10.8s in the 100-meter dash. This is going to be a really big storyline to follow as Oregon looks to achieve a national championship. Look, when you want to beat teams like Ohio State, you want to beat a team like Texas, you have to have the bodies that match up with the Jeremiah Smith, that match up with Carnell Tate. Last year, there were a lot of good defensive backs in this room last year, and it was a unit that was improved, but you probably didn't have the body types. I mean, you had Kobe Savage trying to go man on man with a guy like Emeka Buka. That's not going to work. You have a just different kind of, you got a different level of raw talent in the secondary is probably the best way to say it. And I think secondly, Chris Hampton says everybody's hungry in this room. He was asked, hey, who's showing some hunger in this room? Chris Hampton said everybody. He said, want to know why? Because if you want to play for this Oregon team in 2025, you damn well better be hungry, because it ain't easy getting on the football field. That's kind of the epitome of what Dan Lanning's trying to do at Oregon. You see a lot of maybe opposing college football fans talk about Dan Lanning recruiting over these guys at the high school ranks. It's not what Dan Lanning's trying to do. He's trying to create an ultra competitive environment among the walls of Eugene, Oregon. And that's exactly what you have specifically in the secondary. If you want to play for Oregon in 2025, you better dang well be great. Going to number 2, Bryce Betcher, taking a step back from baseball, maybe allowing him to take a step as a football player. What excites me about Bryce Betcher is, one, this kid is just continues to get better as a football player every single year in Eugene. He's coming back for one more year. Number 1, having Bryce Betcher back from a veteran leadership angle is huge. This is a really young secondary. They got a lot of guys that haven't played a ton of football. Having a bona fide leader, veteran, and Bryce Betcher in the middle of this defense is huge. But I'm just as excited about the football player he can become, focusing 100% of his effort on football, which is something he's probably never done in his athletic career. Bryce Betcher was a very good linebacker for Oregon. Can he be great in 2025? And that's kind of the common conversation that you're having within this Oregon team. How can we go from really, really damn good in 2024 to great to national championship? Bryce Betcher, you're kind of hoping he takes that step. Bear Alexander was a hit. That's another thing. You are hearing it from the players. You are hearing it from the coaching staff. This was a little bit of a risk from Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. Bear Alexander's been at a bunch of different high schools. He's been at a bunch of different colleges since he started his college career. There was certain off the field baggage that might have been potentially there too. I don't want to dive too much into it because I don't know the specifics, but I think we all know that existed. Why I was such a fan of bringing Bear Alexander in the first place is I think Dan Lanning has built a culture where you can take a kid in like Bear Alexander and raise his level. You bring him into an Oregon program that is currently chasing excellence. You get Bear Alexander on that path. It sounds like everything is going as good as you wanted it to with adding Bear Alexander into the room. Why is that such a big storyline? You talk about that conversation from, hey, we were one of the best teams in all of college football last year. We're trying to become the best in the biggest moments. Having guys who can dominate a football game in the middle of that defensive line is something that every single national championship team has had. Go to Ohio State. They got a couple guys that are going to be drafted in the top 100 from the middle of that defensive line. Go to Michigan the year before. Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, NFL guys. Go to Georgia. I mean, Dan Lanning knows this for sure. Guys like Jalen Carter, guys like Jordan Davis. Every national championship team has an interior defensive line that's a problem. It's not just good, it's great. I think Oregon has been getting closer to that. Jamari Caldwell, Derek Harmon, they played very well for Oregon. Maybe not as much depth as you wanted, but you had some difference makers. The thing you're looking for Oregon here is, hey, can Bear Alexander be that disruptive, dominant force that Derek Carmen was? But now can we have the depth that we did not have last year? That's Aiden Breland. That's Tyone Gray. That's Jericho Johnson. Can those guys take a step as well? But I think the big thing you're hearing here is Bear Alexander is going to hit for Oregon. At least that's what it sounds like in spring practice. Last storyline I'll talk about as we try to figure out, what this offense is going to be. And I've been very vocal. I think the ceiling for the offense is going to be higher with a guy like Dante Moore at quarterback. You have similar to the secondary, a disgusting amount of talent in the wide receiver. I mean, we're talking about Jurion Dickey right now in my 3 deep. He's a former 5-star wide receiver that is about as gifted as any player in college football. We think the ceiling's high. I think the question that a lot of us have is, hey, does the offensive line come together? You lose a lot of guys that played a lot of football, including 2 NFL caliber tackles. From a personnel standpoint, you hit. Isaiah World is going to be a top 50 NFL draft pick, or at least I think he has a very good chance to do so. Alex Harkey at right tackle, very solid as well. My bigger question mark is, can you have the continuity necessary to have a really good offensive line? The thing that I'm picking up on is having Poncho back at center is huge for this Oregon offense. Look, you got a lot of new faces around Poncho, but you got your captain center in the middle of that offensive line that's been there, that's done that, that's really emerged as one of the best centers in the country. That's the glue. When you lost Powers Johnson last year, you could tell that Oregon offensive line there were some growing pains, you might say, because you kind of lost the glue guy at the center position. Now you have Poncho after 1 year kind of stepping up and being the guy in that offensive line room, not only a really good football player, but maybe one of the leaders of this unit. That encourages me in terms of, hey, how can this Oregon offensive line hit the ground running with so many new faces? The talent's there. The continuity is the question mark. Returning a guy like Poncho helps in terms of continuity. I think that really fires me up as well. There's not a ton here, but there are some storylines that are starting to emerge. We're going to get a spring game from Oregon. So we're going to get a really good feel. Hey, where is this Oregon team at going into 2025? Make no mistake about it. I don't know if this Oregon team will be as good as it was in the 2024 year, but the ceiling, what they can be, I think is higher than what it was in 2024. That should excite Oregon fans. That team was really good in 2024. You're telling me we could potentially be better in 2025? It's national championship caliber. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.